Press up.
I'm seeing 127 at the moment, which is. Thank you very much for joining us today. Okay, so I'll jump into introducing the session and kind of giving you a little bit of context as to what we're looking to do for you today. So welcome along to the Power Automate part of the software skills offering from the Finance Innovation Forum. Today we've got the headline of transforming data using Power Automate and Power BI. We'll go into a little bit more detail about that as we go along. But in essence, the first thing that we need to do is to introduce to you who your software skills trainers are today. So I'll pass you to my colleague Paul to introduce himself.
Yeah. My name's Paul Ingham. I work for the NHS BSA, the Finance Systems Improvement Manager. So I've been involved in the software for schools network and do some courses for quite a while now. So today's session for me is really just to sort of give you an introduction to the way data can be transformed using Power Automate and Power BI, and hopefully explain the differences and sort of give you a bit more of an understanding of where you can transfer data and what the options and opportunities are. Gareth.
And I'm Gareth Jones. I'm one of the costing development managers at Manchester University NHS Foundation Trust. I'm somebody who has been using Power Automate to do simple repetitive tasks for probably 3 or 4 years now. I will be very honest and say Paul uses it to do much more clever things than me, and you will see that reflected by which parts of the session we deliver today. But I think the key thing that we both want to get across is that Power Automate is very flexible in how you use it, and to some degree is only limited by your imagination of what you want to do with it as a product. The examples we're showing you today are specific to transforming data, but that is by no means the full breadth of what Power Automate can do. So today's session is the latest in an ongoing series, and we're supporting you as software skills delegates to understand the art of the possible for Power Automate and grow your proficiency in leveraging the platform to reduce, as I just said, the administrative overheads, remove the need for time spent carrying out repetitive tasks, and ultimately to ensure humans have more time to carry out value-added tasks. And that's the key takeaway that we want to try and demonstrate from today. Just to reiterate, the examples we're using today are intended to show what can be done with Power Automate and alongside Power BI. But we'll also show you just some of the many other software tools and platforms that you can use in addition to the Microsoft Office suite in order to search knowledge and aid in ways of thinking and understanding process improvement techniques. And I think that's a key thing for both myself and Paul is to say that actually these softwares can be very useful, but they've got to be used in a framework of understanding how to look at processes and identifying where improvements can and should be made. So in terms of that, the kind of the first meaty sort of detail slide there is about understanding the requirements. The key to getting the most out of any automation ultimately, or for that matter, any process that you design, is to understand the requirements that you're trying to meet. The points on this slide are just some of the tools and techniques you can use to achieve what a level of clarity as to what those requirements are, and to kind of keep at the forefront of your mind that you need to meet those requirements with any solution that you ultimately create. So one version of that is a process mapping approach, and as is process, and a to be process. And ultimately that is trying to say, okay, this is the way that things are now, and this is the ultimate goal about what we want to achieve. And in this particular example that we'll show you in a couple of slides time, there's a software tool called Draw.io that's been used. But there are lots of different applications that can do this. And even if you don't use a process map, a visual process map in the way that we're going to show you, just the concept and the discipline of doing that as is process and documenting it and documenting your to be process is a really useful part of process improvement, and it keeps you grounded in what you want to move from and where you want to move to. You'll see throughout the slides as well, and the narrative that things like ChatGPT, Microsoft Copilot, or one that I've not personally used, but I know Paul has, Claude AI, can be used as something of a shortcut, really, to produce an outline process map from any notes that you might have already made in terms of the processes that you've got. So again, it's getting from a point of where we are now to understanding where we need to be, and leveraging additional softwares, if you like, in that process. But ultimately, the principle is understanding where you started out at, which is the as is, and where you want to be. In terms of kind of process improvement, process mapping, and understanding kind of where you need to be, there's something called CATWO, which is a technique for understanding stakeholder perspectives. And in that case, ultimately what you need to recognize is that whilst you may be the one who's designing the process, you're not the only one who's going to be using the process or the solution. So that's very much about understanding how you need to take into account all those different stakeholders when you are designing your process or your solution. And then that leads to building a business activity model that gains a business perspective that you've derived from the CATWOs that you've done to understand the business and activity that your processes are underpinning. So these are all things that we can go into in greater detail if people are interested in, but we kind of wanted to set the groundwork for saying you really need to understand what it is, where you are now and where you need to be. And one of the sound bites I threw out there in previous sessions is ultimately you can make any process quicker by automating it, but automating a bad or redundant process is ultimately not really the kind of improvement that we're trying to achieve. Understanding why there's a requirement for an improvement to your processes is absolutely key to making sure that whatever software you use, it's actually trying to achieve an improvement to where you are right now. So on that sort of note, what you need to really do, and what I'm specifically outlining in this slide, is about working through a problem when the problem is transforming data. So this is just an example. Yes, we are transforming data, but you will use slightly different approaches for maybe the start point if it isn't a data-driven transformation that you're trying to create. But for this example, what we'd always advocate is that you use Excel to prototype what you want to change in your file to obtain formulas, business rules, reference data, and validate assumptions. Ultimately, if you dive straight into trying to build your automation without really knowing what the output is that you want to achieve, you're probably jumping way too far ahead at that point, and you've not really considered what the to be is, where you want to get to. So doing that pre-work before getting into Power Automate is a really important step. Once you've understood what you want your output to be, once you understand how the transformation to the data will work, and if it achieves what you want to achieve for the next steps, then you've got a wealth of Power Automate templates within the Power Automate applications. There's a desktop application and there's a web application, but both of them have a plethora of Power Automate templates. There may not immediately be everything that you want, but they may have the majority of the components that you want to include in your automation. So I would always advocate looking through those templates first before you go to designing from the ground up. Part of how you might want to search that is to understand how you would want to trigger the automation. Is it a scheduled activity dependent on timings? Is it dependent on other reports being run? So is it something that's in a chain, if you like, in a sequence? Or is it something that can be triggered by an event? And an example of that might be a document that's being added to a SharePoint location. You can design any number of different processes, but you can also design different triggers as well to start that automation happening. And just in terms of terminology, it's worth noting that what we're referring to as an automation now in Power Automate is actually called a flow. So if you see that when you're in your other Microsoft Office applications, there's a button that says flow, it is referring to trying to create or giving you the ability to create a Power Automate automation. Again, using ChatGPT or Microsoft Copilot, if you cannot find a template, and I would always look for the templates first within Power Automate, I would then fall back to using ChatGPT or Microsoft Copilot to ask how to perform the ideas or actions that you're wanting to achieve. And if you give it the context of saying, I want to achieve them in Power Automate, then the search results that come back will be within that framework. I will say, whenever you're using an AI assistant like Copilot or ChatGPT, you giving context as to who you are, what you're wanting to achieve, and where you're wanting to achieve it, be it in a software or whatever it might be, is key to getting good results. And something to consider, really, this isn't necessarily a step that you need to take, but it's a consideration that you need to have in mind when you're designing your automations, your flows, is that large data sets will take up more processing actions and require settings to be updated in the action steps. So you may have a flow that works perfectly well when it's only dealing with two or three records. But if it's dealing with a large data set, it could very well be the case that you're repeating those processing actions multiple times. So you just need to be mindful of that when you're testing these flows, that if you see a difference in performance from testing on a small data set to a large data set, it may very well be the case that is the reason as to why the flow slows down a little bit. But I guess the calculation has to be, is it still quicker than a human being doing each of those steps? So it's important to understand the limitations as well as the possibilities of a software like Power Automate, or for that matter, any robotic process automation type software. So here's an example that Paul has drawn up in Draw.io. So this is one of the other softwares that we mentioned a couple of slides ago. And what it is actually something that's been created by putting text prompts into Draw.io, and it's drawn up this process map, this process flow diagram, if you like. So I'm certainly not somebody who's very good at using Microsoft Visio or anything like that to draw up these process maps. So having a software available to you free of charge that can do this sort of thing is an absolute game changer. And the amount of time that it can save in doing these process maps is phenomenal. But as I touched upon before, you have to give it text generate. You have to feed it with text that is actually a meaningful reflection of the process as is and the process to be. So it's really important that you understand your start point and your end point of where you want to get to. So in terms of transformation of data types, there's two main approaches that we're going to be speaking about today, and that Paul's going to demonstrate how you would go about automating them. So ETL, extract, transform, and load, is a method of data extraction that takes the data from the source, it transforms the data and stores the data in a new location in the transformed state. So the transformation happens ahead of time. The advantages of that are it's useful for transforming data that will always be the same transformation, such as a date conversion or removing sensitive data from further outbound processing. For example, if your data contains a national insurance number that will never be used, it should be removed or preferably not extracted at all in the first instance. Another one of the advantages is no means of transforming the data are possible before the data is used. So an example of that would be if you're going to be sending it on to a third party, there can't be any further transformations that take place. In terms of disadvantages, it's the longer development time and generally involves additional cost and maintenance, because terminology and context can change and generally requires developers and system downtime. The maintenance of it is not very flexible when formats or data sets change, and it's prone to obsolescence and the introduction of workarounds. We all know how the NHS loves a workaround. The second form of transformation of data types is extract, load, and transform. So this is a method of data extraction that takes data from the source, loads the data into the new location. So those two steps are exactly the same as the previous one, but it allows transformation of the data using a no-code or low-code tools. So the advantages of that are it's a faster development time and more flexible to change, as the tool, in this example Power BI, can maintain and update transformations on the raw data. It means then you maintain more flexibility to transform or update with new data items. And the data itself can have a wider user base since transformations have not been applied at source. So it means it can be repurposed for many different outcomes. And I think that's a key one for me. Ultimately, the source of the data is still the same, but you are calibrating it specifically for the use that you've got. And it means that you maintain the flexibility to do that for multiple different use cases. In terms of disadvantages, it requires you to have in place a no-code or low-code solution in-house for colleagues to be able to transform and maintain the data transformation. There are a number of different tools that you can do that in, things like Power BI, Power Automate, as we're discussing today, Tabular, Power Query, and Excel. All of these are tools that can transform data. Then there's the cost of the software and the training. Now, the vast majority of us, I would imagine, have got the EC3 license for Microsoft Office, and that allows you to have Power BI Desktop as a free application and as a method for designing dashboards and analysing data. The only limitation with that is that you cannot then publish those dashboards. But if you do have a license that allows you to publish those dashboards, then ultimately that's where you open up the power of what Power BI can do for you. Not all NHS organisations use Power BI as their business intelligence front end, however. What I would say is, yes, today's examples are about using Power Automate and Power BI, but actually Power Automate can integrate with a number of different business intelligence applications too. So please don't feel as though the examples today are the full limit of how Power Automate can integrate with other softwares. And the final disadvantage is knowledge decay. So in terms of the operational management, it's important to document the maintenance and update processes for these transformations and explain what is being done to the data and why. And I think that's a big one again in the NHS. We're not very good at retaining organizational memory, and that's why we're really heavily making this point about documenting your parts of the process, understanding where you started from, where you want to be, and that can give context as to why you're making the transformations to the data that you are. So the technical bits now, this is much more about approach and mindset to transformations and to how to potentially look at what processes are ripe for automation. I'm now going to hand you over to Paul to do the sections on the actual how to do things within Power Automate, how to link it to Power BI, and how to do that transformation of data. Paul, do you want me to carry on driving the slides, or do you want to swap over?
I'll share the screen, that's fine. Yeah, so what we're going to do is we're going to go through a couple of examples with Power Automate and Power BI, just to show you some of the examples of transforming the data in some of the ways Gareth has explained. Just on that note, we will share the files afterwards, so you can actually import the workflow yourself and see if you can get connected. And we'll also share the Power BI and the spreadsheet that goes along with it as well, that I'll go through. So what I'll do is I'll just get my screen shared. Bear with me. And if you can just confirm you can see the screen when it comes through. Come through for you. Can you see it, Gareth? That come through.
Just loading for me.
Is it
so
there?
it's just loading for me at the moment. My microphone was playing up. Yes, it's on screen now, Paul.
Excellent. Okay, so I'll just close this down. Okay, right. So the first thing what I want to do is really just go through the collaboration element. So within Power Automate, the cloud, you've got the flow that you can save within there. So I just wanted to show you what happens. So there's two ways of sharing a flow. So the first flow, the way of sharing it is by co-owners. So if I go here, I can then add a user onto this workflow. So I'm going to just add Gareth, just so we can see what it says when we add it. So if I go to add Gareth, what I can see is I'm going to actually share my connectors. So it might not be a problem sharing some connectors, but when you do, that allows that person to also take ownership of that connector. So for instance, in this one, I'm going to share my connector with Excel, my One Finance drive, and my Outlook. So I might not be comfortable sharing these two because that means that they could view my files and they could view my inbox and do actions and activities within there. So the alternative to sharing a workflow when you don't want to necessarily share them types of connectors is by exporting the workflow, and then the person can import them. So what I wanted to show you today was how to export it and then how to import it and the challenges that you might come across when you're importing the workflow. So to export a workflow, you just need to go into the actual little buttons there and then just select export, and then you get the option of exporting as a package or a get flow identifier. I traditionally just use a package, and what that'll do, that'll produce a zip file that will then download onto your PC, and then you can share that workflow with other people, and then that'll allow them to use their own connections. So you just complete this information here, and then you just basically export the file. So I'll just put test here, we'll just do it now. What I tend to do is I'll change this to create new as well. That just means that when it prompts the user in doing that, it's just going to give them a new workflow to do. So that'll download into your downloads directory. And like I say, you can share that. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through the process of importing the workflow. So I've been sent this workflow from somebody. I want to import it. So I go to you go to your flows, and then into import, and then you select the legacy package there again. What this will do, give you an upload box for you to upload that particular workflow. So I've downloaded it earlier on. I'm going to import it into the workflow now. And it follows very similar steps when you export. It's going to show the same screen as what it was exporting. But what I've got to then do is connect my connectors to the workflow that I've shared and I'm loading in. So the first thing I'll tend to do is I'll check that. I'll make sure it's just create as new. And I can put a new version number in there if I want to, for it to save. And then I'll go through each of the connectors, and I can see I've got a connector, but if I needed to add a new one, all I need to do is press the add connector, and then it'll bring up the options for you to sign in and make a new connection. Once you've signed in and made the new connection, you can just refresh that list and it should show it on that screen for you. See if it'll load up. So you can see there's all these different types of connections, and it can add new ones. Very easy. You can search different types of connections, and like Gary said, there's hundreds upon hundreds of different connections that you can use to get Power Automate to do some good stuff for you. So once we've selected all the relevant connections, like I've already connected these, you can see like last time it run. So import that. There'll be a message that comes up here. So sometimes it might fail, and it'll give you some information to why it's failed. I'll generally go and copy it to ChatGPT if I'm honest, and just see what information is wrong, but it should import fine. Takes a couple of maybe a minute for it to import. It can take longer depending on how big the import is. So once it's open, once it's done that, you should be able to view it in the My Flows, but it gives you a nice link to click on there. So bearing in mind that you've got to trust the workflows that you're importing as well. I wouldn't, and so it's up to yourself, but I'd definitely not just import any workflow. I'd definitely import a workflow that you trust the source from. Like you can get them from GitHub and stuff like that as well. So straight away, it's loaded me into the viewer. So this viewer is the new design viewer. So today I'm going to go through the legacy viewer. I'm more comfortable with that. But with the new design view, you get access to Copilot if your organization's enabled it. And in general, it is a bit of a nicer look and feel. I'm just using the legacy version because, to be honest, I'm more comfortable with it. So all you need to do to view the old version is tick that box there, and that'll load it up into this. Okay, right. So that's done. So when you first import a workflow, it'll always have it turned off. So we're going to turn that workflow on. And what we're going to do is we're going to do an initial test, because I want to show you that, generally speaking, even though you've imported the file, there could be still activities you need to do. So when you get a template, you'll also find that the templates have these problems as well, and you just got to work through them. So I'm just going to test this workflow. I'm going to see it fail. Okay, so it's telling me it's got all the connections in place. If at this stage it didn't, it'd probably prompt here, and you could connect to the relevant connector, depending on what flow you're running. So run through there, and we can see it's failed. So I can jump all the way down these different actions that I've set up, but I can see at the bottom here, which I know it will, it's going to fail. So what I'd do is I'd look at the particular area of failure. I can see that what it's trying to do is trying to find a template one file. Now, I know, because I've imported this from the other one, that I've got a template set up. It's just a blank spreadsheet, but I need that blank spreadsheet for it to do the further tasks further downstream. So I'm going to go back into that workflow, and I'm going to find that particular area where it's failed, and I'm going to connect another spreadsheet to that. So all you need to do is click on that, click there. There should be a template one, all being well, bottom there, template in there. So that saved that one. Now I'm going to run it again, and it's going to fail again. But again, this is just going through the initial flow. Once it's passed, it should just run all the time. It's just getting it initially configured. We're going to run that. Again, it's going to show you the results of the flow. What I've got, so we can see it's failed at this stage now. So what's it saying? It's saying items not found. So what I need to do is just go back to that particular one, create a table. What I can see now is actually that document, it doesn't even look like the document that I was expecting. So I can go back into there, and I'm just going to select the document library it's coming from. I think there's another one just a bit further down as well that I need to change, just so then we can run it successfully. Just make sure I've got no other ones. I'm just going to delete that delay. I don't know if we really need it. I'll just reduce it to 10 seconds. It's just really so the file gets updated before it tries sending the email. Okay, right. So we'll just test this flow, get it working, and then we'll go through some of the examples that are in this Power Workflow. Like I say, I'll send this Power Workflow to yourselves, and you'll be able to do the same activities. In order to get this workflow working, the first thing that you probably want to do is go into your OneDrive and just create a template within your OneDrive networks, and you can connect it and then just link it all up as I've done in this. So what that basically does is this will take a JSON file, which could be a response from an API or something like that. It's becoming a more common format. It'll select that data, and then it'll create a CSV table in this example. It will then get the file, the spreadsheet, like a template file, and then it'll start to populate that information with this table. And then it creates an email ultimately, and then sends that email. So if I go now to my Outlook, because that should have finished, I should have an email. It's been sent in with a report. So it's saying there. So I click into that. And this is ultimately what it's produced. And, you know, this is just an example, but you could do far more complex stuff. And I was saying to Gareth the other day, within the Excel software package now, there is actually a Power Automate tab in there where you can actually do functions and stuff on the last one like that. So basically what it's done is create this record with this table and put that person there. So that's what that workflow's done. Okay, so the way the workflow is structured.
Paul, can I just, do you want to take questions? Do you want me to read out questions as they pop into the chat, or do you want me to break at certain points? So Benjamin has asked, can you set up a flow that can change the file location name, i.e. the file path, automatically based on a table or something, i.e. if the file name had a new name for the month number each month?
That's possible. It depends. So I take it you'd have two sets of table sets really. So what we can do is I can take that as an example if you want, develop it, and then potentially put an example in the Power Automate chat. It sounds like something, you know, it'd be better to show as an example, but it could be done. The way you do it is you'd want to understand what the file name needs to be and what the file name is. So it's just understanding a bit more of that context. So yeah, I think it could be done. So you want to change a file name, basically. You want to change the name of a file based on a business rule. Is that what it was, Gareth?
Yeah. Sorry, Benjamin, do you want to? Yes, Benjamin's saying yes, that's exactly what it is.
Yeah. Okay. No worries. We'll pick up. I'll pick that up with Benjamin directly as well. So that's fine. I can look at that with them. What I'll do is I'll go through the examples on here, and then we can pick up some examples and develop them going forward. So the way this workflow is structured is I've used something called scope. So what scope allows you to do is it allows you to group actions together. So then you can see each of these examples, the scope is what that example contains, with the exception of a variable, which I put as an example in there because you can't put a variable into a scope. That's just one of the constraints, but you can put anything else in there. It just means that, for instance, I like that I want to reuse that code, this one here. I can copy this clipboard, and then I can scroll down and I can just add that. Oh, here, go back to that clipboard. I can just paste that back in and it'll paste all them particular functions in there. So you don't have to copy each one individually. You can copy a series of actions and just copy and paste the scope. I'll just undo that. So the next stage is to go through some of the examples of where we've transformed the data. So this is just explaining about the new design and old design, and that we're going to use the legacy design view for this session. So the first example. So one of the first examples we've got in the workflow is converting the data. So that's something that I found a lot that I have to do within my business is convert dates or move data about, split it and concatenate it and stuff. And Power Automate allows you to do that. So this is the extract, transform, and load approach. So where we're extracting the data, we're transforming it, and then we're going to load it to the next source of where it's going to. So the split function, what that allows you to do is it allows you to split some text up with a delimiter, so you can define that delimiter. So if I go to the next stage, this goes a bit more into what the split is. It's used to handle data and perform operations within a flow. So what this split is doing is actually looking at that piece of text here, and it's saying, okay, wherever there's a forward slash, I want to split that data into a separate string. And what that does, that'll then split it into 10, 18, 20. So if you think about it, we've now got one selection has gone to 3 selections because we're going to split all them. But then what we need to do, so doing that, we're using expressions. So I'll just explain what expressions are. So if we go into here, we can see an expression is here. So that's done differently to a normal one. So if I just wanted to populate it with some dynamic content, such as the outputs, I just select that and that'll populate into there, or it should do. Hasn't done. I should just populate into there. Press that. It's not doing, so I've got the expression in there. Okay, so if you want to put an expression in, you've got to go into this expression, and it's like a formula for Excel without the equal sign. And again, Copilot, ChatGPT, they can all help you. There's plenty of YouTube videos and stuff out there as well for it. So you put that in there, and once you put your expression in there, you press update, and then that'll show. No, it's actually invalid because I'm messing around with it.
Paul,
yeah.
Abel has asked, can you zoom in slightly whilst you're demonstrating this? Because I think it.
Oh, right. Is that better? Okay. Yes. So this is putting an expression in. So to put an expression in, you put it in on this particular bit, and I put the code in there. And again, the examples will go out. You'll be able to see the stuff in there in terms of how to do it. So that splits it. And then the next stage is we want to concatenate it. So what concatenation does is that allows us to then reorganize them strings. So regards to the data, we can use that information to reorganize that string. And what this does is it takes it from an American format, which is there, and then it puts it into a USA format. So when we tested it, and we test that, we can see that it swaps that data over. So I'm just going to run that flow. And this is what's good about the testing area, because now I can go into this, I can see that it's taken that original input, it's split that input, so you can see it split it up into them things based on that delimiter. So you can use any delimiter, comma, text, anything like that. And then the result, you can see what it's done now, it's put it into more of a database format for us there. So that's what it's actually done. So the next one, example I wanted to show you, is where we want to split codes and convert one value to another. So there could be instances where you want to convert. So it's very similar to Benjamin was talking about, where we want to swap one piece of data for another. There's various ways of doing it, and by all means, there's other ways of doing it than what I'm showing you today. But this is one function. Again, we're going to just use a split and concat function again. So what we do with this particular one is we're going to use a, just the right one, split account. We're going to use a variable. So that variable is just a static string value there. And the first thing we're going to do is, I think that one gets ignored actually. We're going to format it, I think that's what that is, formatting. Yes, this is formatting it. So this is putting that into split. I'll show you the actual formula to explain it. This one. So what that's doing, that's coming. So we've got the, I don't think, if that came in with the split, I don't think that's used. I think that's an old one. My apologies. What I'm trying to do here. Variables. So split that count. Segment. So that's a split. So what we're splitting there. Sorry, I'm just trying to work out what my example was. I don't think I'm using a split. Okay. Right, so yeah, so what this subsplit's doing is it's actually splitting the code. So in this instance, what we're trying to do is, like, this happens within our accounting system, for example, that'd be a GL code, but the GL code will be split up into cost center and segments. So what we want to do is we want to split that code up as a full value and then put it into the codes that we can then sort of decipher. So, and then sort of like make it into a different value. So in this instance, what we're doing is we're actually splitting this up using a substring. So what substring can do is it can break up, like we've done it with the delimiter with a split text, but a substring can do it by value. So what this is doing is it's saying, well, select account code, start from letter 0 and go to string 5, and that will then put a / there in front of it. So it splits it up. It'll do another substring with account code. It's going to start at character 5, and it's going to do it for another 5 characters, and then it's going to put a / on it, and then it's going to do another substring with an account code. If it starts at 10 and it gives the last 3 digits in this, and then what we're going to do with that information is we're going to convert it over. So if we go further down here, what this example does is it takes an example. So this is doing a search for me. So if I take that into Notepad++, so it gets more complicated the more formulas you have and stuff like that. So what we've got is this code is saying if, so take this thing, break out that OFAB to OFAB, and it's saying if that file substring, if that equals 11, replace it with converted. So again, I've used ChatGPT to produce this like logic based on this to sort of like break out if that code equals 11, I want it to be converted, but I could also do a lookup against a list or something like that. There's different ways of doing it. But what that's basically going to do is going to convert that string from 111 to converted in the workflow. So when I test that, that'll convert the end of that code to whatever it wants to. So this is just showing you where we're taking data, breaking it up, and then using that broken up data to then convert it to a more useful value, if you will. So go to that one, go down here. You can see that it's done AAA and then converted that file. The other example was where we just wanted to split it with, I don't know if I've copied it, split it with the forward slashes. So that example here I'm showing you is that example there where we're putting that forward slash on it. So we're just breaking it into a mass. And then this other example is then showing you that you can convert that information as well. So it's just really what you can do, text functions to update Power Automate. And then there's some other examples in here as well, which takes you through converting a CSV file. So a lot of data we get sometimes is we'll get data in CSV format. So this is the sample data in CSV, and this takes you through the steps by splitting, first of all, the lines by the new line command, and then it takes you to the field name. So it splits all them out. So it takes your header, which has all your sort of first name, last name, types of things, and then it selects the data one below that. And again, all these expressions are in the actual flow, and if you like copy and paste them and put them into ChatGPT or Claude AI or Microsoft's alternative, it should be able to tell you what that code does. Then it puts the sample data, so we put it into something called JSON, which is the format I explained earlier. From that, it'll create a data output. That data output, we use a function called create HTML table. So it creates this table for you. And then it can also parse that into JSON as well, which can get used into other applications. Like I said, JSON, you might not be where it's JavaScript notation, but it's a format that's sort of replacing XML over time, and it's getting used in a lot of the work that with a lot of data that we're using at the moment. And then the last example was just around, again, transferring that data is one I went through originally around testing the workflow. So you can convert this data, put it into a table, then you could store that onto a SharePoint location or OneDrive location, and then you can email that out to people and stuff. So that's the Power Automate examples what we've gone through. So now what I've done is just put a list in there, the types of expressions that we've used today. So we've gone through using split, which is to split out the text using split it delimiter. We've gone through concatenate, which is used to actually join information together, make sentences and do all that type of stuff. We've used a select function in some of them, which allows you to select specific items and data from objects. We've used a skip function, which was so we could skip that initial line of the CSV data I've just shown you. Tag is used in scenarios where only a subset of array data is needed for processing, so that's within the expressions. We've used an if function, and then we've used a substring function as well, which extracts part of the string based on a specific start, index, and length. So a lot of these, like you'd be familiar with if statements from Excel, but a substring is the equivalent would be the mid function or the left and right function, where you're taking data from specific parts of a text.
Paul, can I just make a point in terms of when we were talking about the as is and to be mapping, what you could see on that design viewer, if you just scroll back just one slide, please, I think it was, it might have been going into the design viewer. What you can see is how many steps there are to these flows, and that's why it really is very, very important to, when you're doing your as is map and your to be map, is to break it down into those really small parts of exactly what you're wanting to achieve. So whilst some of these automations are packaged together, if you like, in the templates, this is the level of thought you'll need to put into saying, okay, what is it that we want to achieve, so that you are automating each of those little sections. And it does take time to do in the first instance, but you've got to recognize the amount of time that it will save over the period of time that you're gonna use that flow. So I just wanted to make that point.
Yeah, designing the workflow like Gareth went through with you earlier about understanding what the as is, what you want to achieve, the could be, the to be. It's really important that you sort of map out what them actions and activities you want to do. We want to do a bit more of an involved example of where we did that, but the timescales were just a bit tight. But yeah, Gareth's totally right. It's okay setting off on doing a Power Automate workflow and having an idea, but the idea has to be implemented. So you need to consider perspectives, who's going to be doing that process, what constraints you have. Volumes, who's going to be using this process as well, and what you're trying to replace is very important. Just so people are aware of what's changing as well in the background. So go through them examples. We've basically gone through some extract, transform, and load processes there. What I wanted to show you now, we do have another software skills area that does Power BI in a bit more detail, a bit more context. I'm just going to show you it from a sort of data processing perspective, but there will be sessions in the future that will go into Power BI a bit more detail, a bit more detail on what I'm going to do basically. So I'm going to get that Power BI file opened up. So in what we discussed earlier is around sometimes, like what I tend to do, I'm quite good with Excel. So if you're not, depending on where your skill set is, you might want to develop something in an application like Excel, and then sort of repurpose that into Power BI, or you might feel comfortable enough just jumping into Power BI. You might be comfortable enough just writing it out and writing pseudocode of what you want it to do, and then learning how to do it in Power BI. But what I wanted to do is just take this data set that I get from a report, for example, and it's got these data items in here. You might be familiar with some of the terminology, the periods, the GL code, the amounts, that type of thing. So what I've done there is I found that actually that date, for example, which date, that needs to be converted into a date for me. So I've got a separate conversion table. What I generally do is a lookup. So I'll show you how you do lookups within Power BI. We do a lot of lookups as accountants. Then we've got combining columns. So for example, sometimes we have the debit and credit side. So you might want to combine them. So all we have to do is an if function. If that's empty, populate it with that one. If not, so what I'm doing is I'm just really converting all the codes that I need to do in advance of all the different splits and all the different conversions I need to do. So I understand when I go to Power BI what information I need to do. So I'll just zoom in a bit more actually so people can see better. So then once I've got that requirement, I'm then going to Power BI and I've created, so this Power BI that I'll send you is standalone. So this table is actually stored within the Power BI model, but traditionally you just load this data in and then you'll be able to do all the manipulations and conversions initially to get it into this state, get it into your headers are up there and whatnot. So this stage is just showing you what I've done with that data to get this Excel reflective to in this Power BI model. So if we look at the sort of stuff here, what we can see is I've got a separate table. And again, this table's there for you guys as well. This just helps you convert any different combinations of data into a date for you. So what I'm doing initially, let me just get from there to sample data. I'm just doing a related. So I'm doing a mid selection. So what I'll do is that's a very similar code what we use for Excel. A mid function. I just want to select the period 1 to 4, so I can look that period up here, and I use the related function. So in Excel it's called lookup. In Power BI you'll generally use the related function, and then I've already made a relationship. See that data using the primary key for all this data there is all like recreated in there, so you can see. All these are sort of lookups that are looking up separate data. So if I look at what we do in the NHS BSA, we'll take that reference data and extract it into a folder, and then we can use Power BI and SharePoint links to connect them all together later on. So then what we end up having is a daily refresh of all the reference data, all these, like what the to available for the sample data to then make it more meaningful for non-finance users. So we've got that. So that's an example of using a related column and a mid function. This one is where we're using a combined column. So again, that's just an if statement. So if we went back to Excel, it's very, very much the same as what we were doing in Excel, I think, you know, if this, then that. So if amount is A is equal to 0, then it's the amount B. If it's not, it's the amount A. And then we've got the split codes. So what I'll tend to do, this is more like going back to what Gareth was saying about maintaining data. I could easily put this code into the final conversion code there. But what it does do is it sort of like makes it difficult for me to maintain it. So 3 months later, I'll come down, I'll see that there's a massive formula there. I don't understand it, but if I break it down in these columns, it allows me to then go, well, okay, I've split that. Okay, well, what am I doing there? Well, I'm actually looking at split code 1 there, and I'm going to convert it based on the related table that I've got in there. So it just makes it easier for me to maintain later on if I did that. If I put loads of complicated formulas into these DAX formulas later on, it might be difficult for someone else to come along and maintain, let alone myself, who's like not looked at it for 6 or 7 months. So sometimes it's good just to break out your formulas so then you can convert it. Okay.
Paul, Matthew from NHS Norfolk has asked, do you ever allow Power BI to have access into the system, or do you keep a repository for saving down reports?
It's horses for courses. We can do connections to the database. We use Oracle, and we can do that. And I think Power BI gives us the opportunity to do that. The difficulty with that is the data release that you're doing. That it's not very controlled. So for me, I don't generally. Well, we've got one database connection to a data lake for a particular service, but in general, what we want to do is we want to keep a repository, like you said there, where people can access them files. So it could be like at the minute we're using SharePoint locations and exporting the data into them drives for other consumers, because we can control access to them folders a lot better than a database connection. Because once that data gets out of the system, it's difficult to know where it's going to. So we want to keep that authorized access. So it really depends on your organization, but generally speaking, now when we talk about connecting to database as well, it's fair to say that you can create views and stuff where they can only look at certain data sets as well. So it really depends on what you're looking to sort of connect to and what the sensitivity of that data is. So I wouldn't feel comfortable connecting to the data that we have in our systems for finance purposes at the moment. I think we'd have to sort of really look at what we're looking to achieve, you know, when we're doing them auto feeds. There's no demand from my business, I don't think, to real-time report that data, but other areas may have that need.
Yeah, I think Matthew agrees with you there. He's put thumbs up, definitely better to keep the tap controlled.
Yeah, that's it, you know, and that's definitely always a thought process that I'm always thinking. So this next example here, what this does is I'm trying to show you that you can use the data sets as business rules as well. So within this data set, I've got split code 3. What's that data set here? Split code 3. We can see I've had another couple of columns on there, and these are just business rules. So if you think of this as like a matrix table, anything that equals that split code, we can follow a defined path. It's a predictable outcome, I call it. So sometimes that triggers a rule. Journal types are a good example of this, where you've got a journal code, and actually that journal code would always initiate this business rule. So you can extend your reference table data to also do rules for you, so do things and actions later on in your formula. So this one, what we're saying is this made up, by the way, it's not true. The vatable business rule, all these are yes, that's a no. When that's a no, it's going to be a 0. When it's a yes, we're going to add VAT onto it. And all what this is doing is then using that as a business rule. And go back to the right table. Again, for visibility, I've just put that trigger in there, could make a formula and just look it up and get the value and then populate all these. But I tend to split them out just to make it easy to maintain for myself and people who might be looking at it later on. You can see it's populating it, it's looking up against that related table, and then I'm telling it to bring in the VAT business rule. And then from that, it's actually just plugging the value anyway there. But from that, I can then say, well, actually calculate that value. If that's a yes, calculate it based on that business rule. And that's really just a conversion using the business rule. So it wouldn't give you the VAT value if we didn't. So it's just an example of where we're using like a business rule to trigger an event further downstream on a formula. So let's have a look and see what screens we've got there. I think that's it really in terms of the examples. Just bear with me. I'll just come off screen. Stop sharing. There we go. Yeah, so that's really the walkthrough example. So what we've gone through there is just to sort of give you an idea of how we can extract, transform, and load. Extract, load, and transform into Power BI, where you can have much more control over the data. You can see that you can have much more control of the data, and then you can use that better. And you can sort of build extra reference tables and start linking it together. You know, like as a finance systems manager, I get a lot of requests from accountants wanting to do what is impossible with the system, because we've got a certain number of fields to collect data, but sometimes accountants have different needs to regroup that data, do further on processing with it. They've got to have conversations with business budget holders and stuff, and they've got their way of doing it. What we're trying to do is use Power BI to give them access to the raw data, and then they can start repurposing it for their business service areas, reducing the number of reports that we have to manage, maintain, and develop. Because we'll get to the point where we're developing a report for each service area. It's very hard to maintain that going forward. So by giving them the tools and the raw data up front, we feel that that'll help them, be more empowered and self-serve, but ultimately, and get better finance reporting ultimately. Is there any more questions?
There is, and it's potentially an ideological one, is maybe the way that I would characterize it. So George has asked, may I ask what benefits do Power BI and Power Automate provide when compared to just using Excel or VBA macros? Is it an easier UI?
Again, it's horses for courses. Like I tend to stay away from VBA macros only because there's still a human that's involved in that interaction. So I think the biggest difference when you're moving away from, say, Excel to Power Automate and using Power BI, and we've not shown you half of the abilities, is that these can be triggered by external events, times, schedules, but generally a macro will need a human to go in there, press buttons, and generally speaking, if that person who's made that macro moves on from the business, what happens is workarounds start coming in on that spreadsheet, and people break the macros and they start doing what the macro did originally as a manual process, and they never fix it, and then you'll end up like having a workaround process again until someone comes in who knows about the macro. So it really depends on your team, your structure, who's going to maintain these products. Power Automate and Power BI bring the same challenges, but at least there's less sort of change, I feel, when you're looking at macros. It's also for courses. You can achieve the same outcomes using VBA macros and Excel, but generally speaking, you need a human in that. And I think what we're doing is we're taking away that person to have to go in there, copy and paste data, or rely on links not changing and using like log. It depends really what you're trying to do. But the benefits is automating and removing the need for that human intervention, I think, in a lot of them processes. I find it UI a lot easier as well. Do you, Gareth? Like
absolutely, and I live in Power BI at the moment, but that's largely because my role is to do engagement and be able to share data in a way that people can manipulate it, but only in the ways that we want them to manipulate it. And I think if you give an Excel file, that opens up the possibility for people to manipulate in a way that you maybe don't want to.
I was just thinking around Excel as well recently, in terms of scale, the data sets that we're playing with, when you're looking at journal lines and stuff, you're talking millions of lines of entries, and like Excel as a product can't cope with the level of analysis we want to do on that data set anymore. That's why we sort of are moving to the Power BI model. So do you find, Power can be used in conjunction? Oh, definitely, yeah. No, this is the whole point of Power Automate, I think, and Power Apps in general, is the fact that they can integrate with each other. I wouldn't, exclusively say use one or the other. I think this is where we're looking at the as-is process and the to-be process, and trying to understand what that solution looks like. So yeah, it could involve Excel. Like recently, they just put that automate Excel functionality within there. And as Gareth explained, there's plenty of places now where you can trigger Power Automate from your application. So on lists, which I didn't show you, but on lists, for example, which is a tool that sort of I use it a lot, to collate data and do little plans and stuff. So let me just come out of this. You go to Power there, and you go to this one as an example. I can go to Power Automate, and I can initiate a Power Automate from here, and you can search your templates. When you click on it, it'll create the Power Automate workflow, and it'll put all the SharePoint locations, etc., in there. And again, so that's going to create this workflow against that list. So every time I want to trigger that event, I can actually trigger that list. But you can generate workflows from within applications. And I think Excel also has that functionality.
I think one point I would say, whilst Paul's kind of finding those examples, is part of the CAPWO is understanding what your stakeholders require. So if your stakeholders are used to using Excel and that's what they're comfortable in, then you would probably use Excel rather than Power BI. It's really important to consider what your end user is going to be comfortable with, because you can have an all singing, all dancing process, but if the output isn't something that is useful to the business as it currently stands, then it's just a Rolls Royce that is taking you to a destination that nobody can get out and actually do anything useful with.
Just on regards to the Power Automate network performance, I don't think it can. I think it's on the Azure platform. One of the good things about Power Automate is it can integrate something called Power Apps. So yeah, I don't think it'll affect the process. Now, Gareth mentioned earlier, the more steps you put in there, the more transformations you're doing, the longer it's going to take. Especially when you use the apply to all function on certain things like Excel spreadsheets take a long time to churn through the data, but if you use a CSV file, it churns through it a lot faster. It depends on the file type it's processing sometimes, but that's not going to affect your performance. It affects the workflow's performance. So it just means it's going to take 1 minute instead of 30 seconds, or 10 minutes instead of 20 seconds.
I think the question, if I'm reading it right, and please tell me if I'm not, is I think it's the other way around, is can the flow itself be influenced by how your network is performing at that point in time? That was my reading of it.
I think they're separate. I think well, it's separate as your tenant is. Like if your tenant's busy, which is your tenant as a Office 365, it's going to affect everybody. But your flow's not going to break it. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's true. The Power BI stuff, you can implement role level security. There's more control. It's read only facility. Publish the stuff as well. So that's a very good point. Also with Excel, there's the scale. It's the scale thing. Like we were trying to load 1 million journals in the other month, and it just wasn't having any of it, to be honest. Okay, cloud version. Yeah, so you've been using, Nina, that's interesting. I've been using a desktop version as well, and it does have different capabilities to what the cloud does. And that's really when you want to run it locally on your PC, and they do complement each other. So I do think that's really good, that you're starting to use Power Automate Desktop, and I'm trying to use it for doing automated testing and stuff like that within the systems and stuff at the moment. But unfortunately, what you found is that the UI changed on every upgrade. So you might do all your tests there, but then when it upgrades, you've got to maintain that again. So it's just getting familiar with what you can and can't do.
There's no more questions coming through at this point in time. I guess one thing I would say is that part of us showing you how to export and import workflows is to, certain things you do want to run just from your PC, and the desktop version is very useful for that. But ultimately, if it's a workflow that works, what you want to be able to do is kind of grow the benefit that you're getting, the savings, the time savings, the people hours, you want to multiply that by as many as you possibly can in a safe and sustainable way. So being able to export these workflows and import them elsewhere is a way to then say, okay, we've developed this once and it may need to be amended ever so slightly for your area, but 80% of the flow is already written, and we're paying it forward in terms of saving time further down the line.
So it's only regards to the templates and stuff, because they are really good. And what you sometimes find is the logic that they put into them templates are quite complex as well. So for instance, like a Teams one where I was doing a list reminder, it had a template there, but it had lots of logic, you know, not just to send it just to one person, it could send it to several people depending on what people put in that box. So sometimes you'll end up learning from them workflows as well. When you look at a template, like, oh, I can do it this way, I can do it that way. And again, you know, I can't stress as much more as possible than to use the tools like ChatGPT. You know what, don't put your customer data in there, but you can ask it what you want it to do, and it will give you some good feedback and get you on your way to any you know, problems that you have with it.
An example I would say of using that is that I'm not an accountant by background. I'm somebody who's worked in Excel for years, but I'm not somebody who necessarily writes formulas. But I've been able to kind of move into Power BI fairly easily because I've been able to describe what I want from a formula in another then language, because Power BI uses DAX instead of Excel formula language. It is fairly similar, but I didn't know how to write those formulas in Excel, so I certainly don't know how to write them in DAX, but I can go into Copilot and I can describe what it is that I'm trying to achieve, and I can get that I can get the result, and I can copy it and I can drop it straight into Power BI and do what I need to with it. ChatGPT is and Copilot, for me, there's a lot of talk about, is AI going to take away the work that humans do? No, I don't think it is. I think it's just going to get us to a point quicker whereby the human bits, we can get on with the bits that only humans can do. It's, you know, Excel, when Excel was created, it didn't stop there being a need for accountants. It just meant that we could get closer to the point of doing the bits that only the accountants can do. So I think keep abreast of the technology that's coming out, use it to augment the work that you do right now. And I think that's how to move forward in a world where software is being created at a great pace, and it can sometimes be quite a dizzying landscape to be involved in. But curating which bits of software work for you, I think, is a key skill in kind of in terms of a workplace landscape at this point in time, and especially within the NHS, and the fact that we've got Office 365 and Microsoft are developing these really powerful tools is a fantastic benefit that we've got, that you wouldn't necessarily have as a personal subscriber to Office 365. So try and make the most of them if they make sense for your business, is what I would say.
That sounds good. And what we're just trying today is I'm just trying to save the files, what we've gone through today. So what we'll do is we'll send a link out at the end of the session, which will give you a link to the Power Automate channel. That'll give you access to all the 3 files that I've shown you today. And then by all means, ask any questions on the back of that. We'll go through the chat. And if I find, like, I think there was Benjamin, wasn't there? And that had an example of what they might want to do. But if there's anybody else who's got any questions or anything like that from the back of the examples that have been shown, you know, these might be examples that other people want to sort of know about. So shout out in the Power Automate channel. And what we'll do is we can look and building up some examples of where people want to use Power Automate to do things with. And, you know, Power BI, I think that can get picked up in Power BI stuff as well, the channel that's been done there. Is there any more questions?
I've not seen any more questions popping in. I think people are realizing we've run ever so slightly over time by waiting to start for a couple of minutes. So thank you everybody for attending today. We hope you've got some real benefit out of it, and any feedback you can give us, good, bad or indifferent, will be greatly appreciated. But go out there and automate.
Cheers. Thank you very much for your time, and yeah, automate, good automating. All right,
you.
cheers. Goodbye.